speakers to you today. Today's speakers are David Cuquetts, the EIM Client Partner for the Southeast at Utopia, Martin Query, EIM Sales Specialist, Southeast at SAP Business Objects, and John Ferrioli, SVP at Utopia, Inc. Without further ado, I am going to hand it off to John.
Well, thanks very much, Jody. Appreciate the introduction. Today's webinar is all about how managing data as an asset can be accomplished, and ultimately some ideas and best practices around building the business case through an evidential approach to looking at your data and moving away from anecdotes and moving more into evidence. We'll address today business challenges of data, how to identify toxic data that compromises your business processes as well as your reporting integrity. And then we'll take you through the data health assessment process, the enabling technology from SAP Business Objects, and we'll give you some real-world examples and some case studies as far as the data health assessment report and the business benefit. And again, the end state is to leverage data and also help use it to build your business case for establishing the critical attachment between the integrity of the data and the ability to execute a process and find reporting integrity. With this, I'll turn it over to Dave Cuquetts for the business challenges and identifying the toxic data. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jody. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Cuquetts with Utopia, Client Partner for the Southeast. Before we get started, I'd like to just mention a couple of data doctrines that we live by. The first one is that operational efficiency is only as good as the data fueling your business processes, like the engine in a finely tuned race car. And the other one is that your reports are only as good as your data and your data practice. So your reports are like a compass, and is it really showing you due north or not? By example, I'd like you to think about a couple of companies that are very popular and contrast them with their brick and mortar counterparts in retail, which might be Borders and Barnes & Noble versus an Overstock.com or Amazon or eBay. I'd like you to think about iTunes versus CDs, cassette tapes, 8-track, and vinyl. And then think about Netflix versus Blockbuster. And you'll see that there are huge differences in the way these particular type of companies leverage data and the processes around data to drive competitive advantage and create differentiators between them and their counterparts. Next slide, Jody, thanks. So let's look at this workflow here, and really, so data does two things. It drives operational efficiencies, and it drives integrity in your reporting. So what are some examples of those efficiencies? Increasing revenue through more effective trade promotions and rebate programs, implementing cross-sell and upsell strategies, getting the right order to the right customer at the right price at the right time, and introducing new, exciting products to the market faster than your competition. All of these things are enabled through business process, people, technology, and also data. As far as reporting integrity, quality data builds and supports trust. Trust in the reports and in the systems that generate those reports, and trust in the decisions made based on those reports and in the decision makers. So with trust in your company, that's going to lead to things like improving morale and the sense of vision and mission, increasing user adoption of existing or new IT investments, enhancing productivity of people and systems, and other things such as avoiding governance risk and compliance issues. So let's take another look at business pains by stakeholders. So again, we want to understand how data affects your business execution and how we can examine the quality of your data, because everything is linked in a chain. So we're hearing a lot these days that the volume of data is exploding, which is increasing IT costs and causing information overload. It's clogging the plumbing and burdening and slowing your systems and your processes and people. Another element about data is that it decays over time due to changes in your systems, changes in the data, some that are not intended, and changes in the real world. And when these things are out of sync, it could lead to inventory levels that aren't as actually reported. Sales by geography reports are skewed. Tax IDs are out of date, resulting in overpayment of taxes, or other things such as inactive vendors being paid twice, and the bad invoices are not being red flagged. There's another effect that goes on here, which is the guru effect. So Pete the parts guy and Joe the plumber, who have all this knowledge about parts and vendors, leave your business, and all of that information leaves with them. You might find one day that they were instrumental in making your operations effective and efficient. Another thing that occurs is that businesses grow through mergers and acquisitions, and so you have islands and silos of applications, plants, operations, sales divisions, and they all have data that exists across disparate systems, old legacy systems, and there's no integration. Also, data exists in different configurations and different formats and different definitions, if there are any, and there's no commonality. So IT is struggling to address these rapidly changing business requirements while also supporting the line of business leaders. There's one more quick point, and Jody, you could go ahead and just advance that a little. There are cultural and political issues that come to play within a business, and it comes down to this. Nobody owns the data, but everybody owns the problem. And so what we're showing here is that with high quality data, you can increase revenue and productivity and morale, and you can also decrease cost of goods sold, sales, general and administrative expenses, MRO expense, inventory, and so forth. I want to point out a factoid in a study in 2009 by Gartner Group. By 2011, companies that adopt enterprise information management best practices will be able to reduce operational costs at a rate 2 times greater than that of their competitors and sustain those reduced costs for a longer time. Next slide, please, Jody. Now we're going to talk about, since we talked about the business implications, let's figure out how to find and identify toxic data. So we have an example of a round bearing, also known as a ball bearing, also known as a linear bearing. And the meaning of this data might be different depending on whether you're a manufacturer of things where these bearings are part of the assembly, or whether you're a distributor of parts like bearings, or whether you need bearings in the equipment in your factory in order to produce widgets each day. Now, what we're seeing here is that there are 8 different material codes. We have 8 different descriptions. And we'll also see that there are no standardized units of measure. There are no classification codes. There's one OEM, which is SKF, and there are no alternates such as Timken or NTN. The only differences between all of these bearings listed here is whether or not they're sealed and the speed rating. Now, what's really telling here is the following 2 points. One, the prices differ by nearly 800%. And you'll notice that Brooke Hansen sells very similar bearings at nearly a 200 or 100% difference in price. So how could that be? Probably because you have 2 operating plants that have different contracts with the same vendor, but you just don't know it. The other thing you'll notice here is that the PDT, or planned delivery time, varies by over 500% with no correlation to the prices paid. Again, you'd have to ask yourself if that's an efficient use of these assets. So this kind of data may feed processes such as warranty parts management or spare parts management. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to inventory optimization across all of your plants, reduction in working capital, inventory carrying costs, spend visibility and analysis, strategic sourcing and alternates, plant maintenance efficiencies, and so forth. Now, I also want to point out that although we're showing a material master example, this very similar analogies could hold true whether we were looking at vendor data or customer data. Next slide, please, Jody. So we're going to talk about the DHA process. And I think rule number one in best practices is to diagnose issues early, before or while you're improving business processes and your reporting integrity, and don't wait until after, because it's too late. Everybody's busy putting up fires once the system goes live or after the big investment, in a new system has been made. In 2007, the American SAP Users Group did a study, and it said that 93% of business application upgrade or business process improvement initiatives suffer significant data problems. The other 7% are probably just being a little disingenuous because everybody has data quality issues, or maybe they just don't really know it or they don't get it. Now, what often happens 75% of the time is that these data problems are found very late in the deployment cycle. It's a lot more expensive to make changes later than to find them now and start taking advantage of the benefits that high-quality data brings you today. The second thing about this, and Jody, you can go ahead and advance a little bit. There are several questions that we want to ask ourselves in best practices. How bad is the data? How badly is it affecting our business? Who owns the problem? Who owns the data? How are we going to fix it? And how will we fund it? But there's good news. We can detox your business processes and your data. And the solution is to understand the present state of the union with respect to your data quality and to assess how that relates to your business performance and reporting. So how do we do that? Go ahead, Jody, one more click, please. We can employ our data health assessment as a first step. Okay. Now, let's talk about that process very quickly. So we've got a time-tested and proven process for data health assessments. The purpose is to establish an evidential baseline and foundation relative to the integrity of your data and illustrate how your business initiatives are compromised due to poor data. The DHA profiles, analyzes, and visualizes the existing as-is state of the union of your data and the data integrity against four dimensions: completeness, consistency, conformity, and duplicity or uniqueness. And this is coupled with standards and or customer-defined business rules, which enable us to quantitatively measure data quality and then make qualitative linkage to business pains. So we've touched upon some of the completeness and consistency issues and duplicity issues in the previous example of the bearing. Now the output of a DHA report summarizes the impact that poor data has on your business and recommends the next steps to achieve measurable improvement in business processes. So now we're going to talk about the technology next, and we have Martin Query from SAP Business Objects. Utopia leverages SAP Business Objects Enterprise Information Management Platform and reporting tools for things like the data health assessments, data migrations, real-time data governance, and other projects and processes that require fast time to value, market leadership, and comprehensive solutions to data. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Martin?
Thank you, Dave. So with that kind introduction, my name is Martin Query. I am the EIM sales specialist for the Southeast, covering emerging accounts. Prior to that, I spent about the last 10, 12 years really in this whole kind of data space, so I'm very enthusiastic about kind of driving into customer issues and problem issues around data domains, if you will. To net it out, what I want to spend the next 5 minutes or so is just kind of giving you a very brief infomercial, if you will, about SAP and the products and the platform that we bring to bear for EIM. It's our contention that we do offer the most comprehensive platform for deploying and managing EIM implementations, as Dave alluded to. And a couple points that I bring there is, number one, we work with any data types, and we support any sort of technical architecture. The second piece there is key because, you know, a lot of people think of SAP, think of SAP ERP. We certainly work with a myriad of applications out there. We've got, you know, thousands of very mature customers we work with across all different lines of business and all different domains. And the second piece that I would kind of point to is the thought leaders. The thought leaders have pointed to SAP and said, you know what, these guys know what they're doing. They're on the right track. They've built the right platform to deploy and to move forward with. So next slide, please, Jody. So essentially, EIM kind of incorporates a lot of different areas, and this is where I kind of like to get on my soapbox a little bit and talk about, you know, the challenges of EIM and why EIM. And, you know, as Dave so, you know, eloquently was talking about fuel and, you know, fuel in cars and racing cars and that sort of thing, the bottom line is many companies have spent a lot of money on implementations, on applications, and they're not getting the bang for the buck out of that. And what we've seen is that there's been a need in the market to bring one cohesive platform, so go ahead and animate this if you would, to bear so that, you know, data services now can be wrapped into one tool, one platform, multi-use, and it really becomes much of a build once, deploy many capability that we talk about. So, you know, as opposed to you having to go to company A and get your data quality technology and company B and get your ETL technology, we wrap that all into one cohesive platform that we call data services, and it allows you to very simply and readily, from not only the technical side, from the business side, to start deploy these applications. The next slide, please, Jody. The other thing that I want to key in on here is that we realize that EIM is not kind of a one-and-done process, even though we're spending a lot of time today, and as John will be getting into in a few more minutes, talking about assessing the data and profiling the data and those sorts of things. It really isn't one and done. It's a continuous process, and this is a factory of keeping your data cleansed over time. So it really is assess the data, cleanse the data, enhance it and enrich it with whatever other business-specific values that you can bring to bear, match and consolidate it, start the whole process over again by monitoring it. So, you know, that's really key. And then the final thing that I want to leave you here with is kind of an example of matching and consolidation. This is where we've taken, you know, a variety of input records from multi-sources and brought them down into one single view of a customer. This could be single view of a product. This could be single view of a doctor. It could be single view of whatever you want it to be. And the important piece is that SAP is doing all the heavy lifting here. By simply taking our products and our solutions and tuning them correctly, we are able very algorithmically to be able to provide this sort of functionality. Next slide, please. So again, so the last slide here for me, you know, kind of everything from cradle to grave with the data, everything from data creation and doing kind of data at the very point of capture and keeping it clean, through analysis and profiling, which gives you a baseline of a data health assessment, heavy lifting with ETL, supporting data warehouses, and finally, what happens to the history of your data? When you decommission it, what happens? How do you archive it? How do you set up the chain of events to retrieve that data that was changed at a certain point in time? Utopia. Utopia is a strategic partner of SAP, and one of the things that one of the things that we have definitely recognized over the period of the last few years is that, it's much more about the technology, or it's more than the technology to bring a solution to bear here. And one of the pieces that Utopia has done an extremely good value for us and for our both joint customers and joint partners is they bring the people, the process, the technology, and as important as anything, the expertise. They've been there, they've heard that, they've done that type of methodology to help you and us get to the point where we need to be, which is better data at the end game. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Appreciate it, Martin. Thank you. So what we'd like to do now, you heard a little bit about the business pain and how effectively applications and reporting tools are only as good as the data that they execute against. And regardless of your application platform, whether it's SAP or a non-SAP application, the lifeblood of that system is the data. And what we try to do in combination with SAP is to illustrate to our clients, how a business case can be generated to get a project going and also to maintain and manage the integrity of the data for the long term. So as Martin has pointed out, data is not an event in time, it's a life cycle. And we have that approach here at Utopia, looking at data from its point of creation through its end of life. This is an output from an actual customer file that we did in assessing their data. And this data scorecard is done by the process that Dave Kuket had illuminated to you, taking the data, profiling it, running it through the SAP Business Objects Data Services platform, and looking at a number of dimensions that you see reflected before you. The end state is that we're moving away from the idea of of anecdotes about whether or not we think the data is good or bad, but more evidential to say we have only 47.26% completeness relative to the number of duplicates. We've got suspect duplicates and we've got direct duplicates of 32%. With this, if you're trying to achieve a spend analysis initiative or strategic sourcing, if you've got duplicates in your vendor data, you're just simply never going to achieve the business results. You might get a report, but unfortunately that report will be very suspect. And so by breaking it down into a number of qualifiers and parameters around the integrity of the data, you can see where the challenges lie. You can see processes that perhaps are not being enforced or business rules that are not being enforced relative to the data. And that's why we see things like on the completeness line, the first line, only 12% of the data has a complete record for fully attributed fields. And what this means is that if you were to have a tax ID field or a secondary field that's required for reporting, and that field is not complete, or it's a blank, or in the case of conformity, if it says 9999X for tax ID, you're going to have a very difficult time generating the type of reporting with integrity or executing against a business process. So this evidential data health assessment helps us go back to business and the leadership within the organization and say the data is corrupting your business process and your reporting and ultimately your decision making. Another way to look at this is that regardless of object type and regardless of system, whether it's coming from SAP or non-SAP systems, the Business Objects platform allows us to take a look at, what is the integrity of data, what's the source. If you look up at the upper right corner, you can see an analysis that was done against a vendor master, where 67% of the records were actually flagged for deletion or invalid in a production SAP system. And what this translates to, again, regardless of application or SAP or non-SAP, what this translates to is that initiatives like strategic sourcing, spend analytic, exposed risk like money laundering and fraud detection could be happening at your organization because the integrity of the data is suspect. And when you're doing searches against inactive and invalid records, your application performance is corrupted, your ability to analyze is corrupted, and your ability to execute your processes and reporting are frankly compromised. So it's not so much about whether or not you have a report, but it's about whether you have integrity in the report. And this data profiling is an excellent way to get the business people aligned so that from the CFO, you can create an initiative to stop money laundering or fraud because POs could be cut against an inactive vendor in production systems. You can support things like spend analytic and strategic sourcing. You can support inventory optimization. But all of that will be compromised without good centralized management of the vendor master and the material master. So this is a good way to help us understand where the problems are so we can go to and attack the problem. Let's go to the next slide for an output of the data health assessment report. In this, we show you the evidence, and we lay it out for you leveraging the data services platform. And again, this is open to SAP or non-SAP systems for analysis. But then we give you the opportunity to enact these data profiling events, these data health assessments in an ongoing governance model so that you can measure against your progress and measure against whether or not the business operations will be effective or not. Once we break down the data, it again gets into a very black and white approach that says, here are our findings and analysis. Here's the business impact and the opportunity. The recommendations to fix the problem, and then ultimately a timeline to appreciate what the level of effort would be. When you take a look at things in the previous example where we saw that vendor hierarchies were not used in the data model, well, we knew that this customer was trying to achieve a spend optimization and leverage global best price, but without the data behind it, that initiative is compromised. So we can draw out a conclusive tie-in between the data and the process execution and ultimately the return on the investment. In one case, we saw duplicate tax IDs in the previous slide when we broke down per field. When we see duplicate tax IDs, we see risk for things like overpaying of vendors more than one time and potentially leading to ambiguous identification of correct tax payment for a corresponding vendor. So there's challenges around reconciliation of those vendors' invoicing. There's challenges around overpayment in taxes, as been recognized by numerous companies over the years, lots of famous case studies there. So what we want to do is prevent those challenges from happening in the real world and give a roadmap to how the problem is fixed. Not so much to say your data is bad, but to say your data is bad, but here's how you fix it. And it's a combination of leveraging processes and people and ultimately enabling technologies to enforce your governance policy. So we try to break this down in a clear way to help you all make the business case relative to how critical data integrity is. Let's go to the next slide. And again, the question ultimately is then, well, how do you get started? So we've teamed up with SAP, and what we approach in the data health assessment is that this is not a multiple month engagement. This is actually a snapshot of the data in time. And our typical engagement is, from a processing perspective, of about a week's time. Our appreciation is that this can be done in an off-site capability. It can be done on-site as well, where we come in and profile, and to Dave's point, understand your data. Your client would provide a sample of data to us regardless of source and regardless of type. We've done financial analysis, bills of material, vendor, customer materials, etc. The profiling event, because we have developed our profiling and analysis on top of the data services platform, allows us to understand key parameters for business execution, to generate a report in a rather short timeline, and in approximately less than 2 weeks, turn out a well-defined, articulated report, usually 30 to 40 some odd pages, with detailed analysis of the data, but also the business impact of the data, and a tie-in as to how do you solve those problems. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is to establish credibility by using the data as an asset and bring it forward so that people can't hypothesize whether or not they think the data is bad or not, but point to an evidential report that will allow you to bring your case forward and ultimately optimize processes and optimize reporting integrity. Our offer, if we go to the next slide, our offer is to the attendees on this webinar is to enable our audience to have this evidence and to get an appreciation of how processes can be improved, how goals can be achieved, and by not being hindered by the data. In conclusion, as we kind of to summarize, we did want to point out the business challenges of data, both operational and analytical. We wanted to show you how, from a methodology, a very simplified way to identify toxic data, walk you through the process, and give you an appreciation of the SAP Business Objects enabling platform. The technology itself is a tool, and it should be leveraged in a way that it's not just an event in time, but for the life cycle. So there's many different ways that the data services platform can be leveraged, and we just wanted to highlight one efficient way that we do it today around profiling and analysis to help build a business case, to help solve business challenges, and to help organizations reach their goals. We certainly appreciate your time today. We did want to keep it quick for the lunch hour. And what I'd like to do now is that by either typing in your questions or connecting with our operator, you could post any questions. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jody for the questioning queue, and we thank you very much, and please type in your questions now. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, John. We have had a few questions come through. The first question is, once bad data is identified, what tools are used to systematically cleanse the data without editing records one at a time?
Now, that's a good question, especially when you're dealing with large volumes. So the data services platform, the very same tool that we talked about in enabling technology to do the profiling and analysis, is a world-class data quality and ETL solution that SAP has integrated together. And again, it supports SAP, but also non-SAP platforms. The data quality aspect of the solution is really the transformational and data quality engine that would be used against your business rules to manage hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records for conversion to your data standards. So the process is rather simple, where we capture your business rules, we document them. We then also understand the data model and the data conversion standards that you're trying to achieve. For example, how do you abbreviate the word St. John's Street? Well, there's probably 6 ways you can abbreviate the word street. We want to make sure it's the right way for your industry and for your business and for your reporting continuity. So we apply those business rules, the business logic, and then the conversion is done via data services in an automated way. And this supports not only batch, but also real-time automation of an application of data transformation at the point of creation. Or if you acquire a company and you need to bring in hundreds of thousands of records, you can do the same project to support your mergers and acquisition or your real-time data creation. Lots of flexibility there. Hope that answered the question.
Great. Thanks, John. Another question that came in was, how do you measure the quality of my company's data and make it believable to the C-level?
So another good question. How do you measure the integrity? Well, again, looking against standards, looking against conformity of the data to those standards, looking against number of duplicates, uniqueness of the data, consistency of the format, and also, as mentioned, completeness of the record. It doesn't do you any good if you've got a tax ID that's filled in with 9999X or dummy data. So just because a field is filled out doesn't mean it's meeting a criteria of completeness. So multiple parameters can be set, and then these metrics can be established either through Utopia and SAP providing industry best practices around those standards or completeness ratios, or you can provide that to ourselves. So we don't necessarily need to recreate the wheel if you already have data standards in place, but what we can do is help you enforce them and measure against those data quality metrics. The report is simply signed off by typically the stakeholder who we work with, and we have it validated against the known data sources, SAP or non-SAP sources that you provide us in the file. The end state is this. It is not about emotion as much as it is around just a evidential black and white report that says this is the state of the union. And now the emotion is we can achieve 1 to 3% savings in spend, or we can lower our inventory, or we can reduce days sales outstanding. But the value is in the report, in reporting to the C-levels and your executive sponsors, is that this is our data from our production systems, and it's accurate and it's truthful. And we need to look at it as an asset so that we can leverage it for the business continuity, operational excellence, and reporting integrity for decision-making and competitive advantage.
Okay, thanks, John. I got 2 more quick questions here for you. Does a DHA require the use of business objects and related licenses?
So we've partnered with SAP, and this enabling technology is SAP Business Objects Data Services. But what SAP has done is allowed us to leverage the technology in a proof of concept format. Now, once we show you the data, and if you elect to then solve the challenge and want to implement the software in-house, that would be a license event. But what SAP is trying to do in partnership with Utopia is to allow people to get an appreciation of the platform, to see just one of the 4 or 5 scenarios from a data lifecycle perspective that Martin illustrated, and to have people appreciate the value of an enabling technology that supports not only ongoing data governance, but also data quality and data management in a consistent fashion. So for this event in time for the profiling, there is no license requirement, but the enabling technologies would be SAP Data Services.
Okay, and the last question here, in the essence of time, what would be the 3 quick points to determine the need for a quick health assessment?
I would say, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, I think the 3 quick things to look for would be how things like sales, operations, and reporting are impacted by data quality, along the lines of vendor data, customer data, and material master data. So there's actually a 3x3 matrix. So there's 9 things to look for. And you could also add financial, human resources, and other transactional master data. So there's really, very quickly, sales, operations, and reporting, and then the various flavors of master data that you might have, and just running a DHA on each of those dimensions.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I want to thank you, Dave, Martin, and John for today's session, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. Please remember to fill out the survey following the webinar. If you would like to learn more about Utopia, please feel free to visit our website at utopiainc.com, or any further information on SAP Business Objects, please visit sap.com. To contact us, we have Dave's information and Martin's information currently on your screen. And please feel free to email us with any suggestions for future topics. This webinar was recorded and will be available shortly. We look forward to you joining us at our next webinar. Thank you again and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.